I didn't leave my parents' house with dignity. I was shoved out. It happened in front of everyone. Relatives, neighbors, people who had watched me grow up and decided I was nothing worth keeping. My father laughed when I asked for my coat. My mother called me a parasite and said I should be grateful they'd tolerated me this long. Someone tossed a trash bag at my chest. That was it. My inheritance. My goodbye. The door slammed. The lock turned. Curtains closed. I stood barefoot in the snow while their Christmas lights blinked behind the glass, warm and bright, like a celebration I'd been erased from. My bank app showed $211. No jacket, no place to go, no one to call. Then my father's voice came through the door one last time, calm, satisfied. You'll come back. You always do. I didn't know it yet, but he was wrong. Because buried in the pocket of an old coat was something my family never knew I still had. Something my grandmother gave me years ago, with a warning I finally understood. And by morning, that mistake would cost them everything. Before I tell you who was standing there and what happened next, take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if this story resonates with you. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I truly enjoy connecting with you. Now let me take you back to where everything began. My grandmother's name was Margaret Cole, and in my family she was spoken about the way people talk about a broken appliance, something inconvenient, something waiting to fail. They said she was confused, fragile, that she didn't really know what was going on anymore. Whenever her name came up, my mother would sigh and shake her head as if grief and irritation were the same thing, but that wasn't who she was to me. When I was a kid, Margaret was the only person in that house who spoke to me without measuring what I could become for her later. She never asked about grades the way my parents did, never compared me to other children, never treated affection like a transaction. She just noticed things. Whether I'd eaten, whether I was quiet because I was tired or because I was hurt, she paid attention in a way that felt almost dangerous in that family. They started keeping me away from her when I was a teenager. It was subtle at first. She's resting. She's not feeling well. You'll only confuse her. Then it turned into rules. Visits had to be supervised. Phone calls were discouraged. Letters I would later learn were intercepted and never delivered. At the time, I believed what they told me. I believed she didn't want to see me. I believed she was slipping away. The last time I saw her alone, I was 8 years old. She was sitting at the small kitchen table in her old house, the one my parents later sold without ever asking my opinion. The window was open, and I remember the smell of rain and dust and something warm baking in the oven. She pulled me onto her lap and held my hands longer than usual, her fingers thin but steady. You listen to me, she said quietly. One day you may need help, not the kind people see, the kind they pretend you don't deserve. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pressed something cold and heavy into my palm. A black metal card. No name, no logo I recognized. Just numbers etched into the surface like they'd been carved, not printed. Only use this when you have nowhere else to go, she said. And when you do, don't ask permission from anyone. I laughed back then. 8-year-old confidence. I told her I'd never need it. I had parents. I had a home. She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind people wear when they see storms forming long before the sky changes. That night, after I was thrown out into the snow, I finally understood what she meant. I sat in my car with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my breath fogging the windshield because the heater barely worked. The trash bag they'd given me lay torn open on the passenger seat. Inside wasn't clothing or documents or anything useful. Just a bleach-stained towel, a cracked ornament, a half-burned candle. Proof that even in anger they'd been deliberate. They didn't want me to survive comfortably. They wanted me humiliated. My phone showed almost midnight. No missed calls, no messages, just silence. I reached into the pocket of the old coat I'd grabbed on instinct and felt the card again solid against my fingers. For a long moment, I just held it there, my chest tight, my thoughts moving too fast and not fast enough at the same time. If I used it whatever it was, there would be no going back. No pretending this was temporary. No crawling back inside once the cold became unbearable. I looked at the dark outline of my parents' house one last time, the windows glowing with warmth that no longer belonged to me. Then I started the engine and drove toward the only place still open at that hour, carrying my grandmother's warning like a quiet pulse under my ribs. The diner sat at the edge of a half-empty parking lot, its neon sign flickering like it hadn't decided whether it wanted to stay alive. It was the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen asking for shelter. I parked beside a delivery truck, shut off the engine, and sat there for a full minute before forcing myself to move. My legs felt stiff, my feet still numb from the snow. Inside, the air was thick with grease and burnt coffee. A few truckers occupied the counter, shoulders hunched, eating quietly. A woman in her 70s sat alone in a booth near the window, stirring the same cup over and over again, without drinking it. No one looked at me twice. That anonymity felt like mercy. I slid into a booth and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a cup of coffee I didn't really want, but needed for the warmth. When it arrived, I wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat sink slowly into my fingers. My body was exhausted in a way that went deeper than sleep deprivation. It felt hollowed out, like something essential had been scooped from the center and left me fragile around the edges. I tried not to think about the morning, about what I would do when daylight came and the world expected me to have a plan. The card slipped out of my pocket when I shifted, landing softly against the tabletop with a dull metallic sound. I froze. For a second, it felt like I'd dropped something alive. The waitress noticed it before I could hide it. She paused mid-step, her eyes flicking down to the card, then back to my face. Something in her expression changed, not curiosity, not suspicion. Recognition. She said nothing, just nodded once to herself and walked away faster than she had been moving before. That unsettled me more than if she'd asked questions. I turned the card over in my hand. Up close, it looked older than I remembered. Heavier. The numbers etched into it weren't raised or shiny the way modern cards were. They looked carved, permanent. There was a small emblem in one corner, subtle, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. I pulled out my phone, 6% battery. The emblem matched a name that appeared when I searched it, Cumberland National Trust. One location nearby, hours listed as opening early 6 a.m. for private account holders. The building in the photo looked like something from another era. Marble columns, brass doors. Not the kind of place someone like me walked into without an appointment or an apology. I stared at the screen longer than I meant to, my thumb hovering uselessly above it. My parents' voices echoed in my head, overlapping and relentless. You can't survive on your own. You don't have the discipline. You always need us. The truth was, they'd worked very hard to make that belief feel like fact. I nursed the same coffee for nearly 2 hours. The waitress refilled it without charging me. She didn't smile, didn't speak. She just made sure the mug stayed warm. That quiet kindness landed heavier than anything my family had said to me in years. When the diner started to thin out and the sky outside shifted from black to gray, exhaustion finally dragged me back to my car. I curled up in the back seat, pulling my coat over my knees, the card tucked flat against my chest. The cold crept in anyway. My breath came out white. Sleep, when it arrived, was shallow and fragmented, filled with half-formed memories of my grandmother's hands and my father's voice, hardening behind a closed door. I woke to pale morning light and stiffness that bordered on pain. My phone was dead. My body felt heavier than it should have, like gravity had been turned up overnight. For a moment, The weight of it all pressed down so hard, I considered driving away from the bank entirely. Leaving town. Disappearing before anyone could tell me again what I was worth. Then I remembered the way my parents had smiled when the lock turned. I sat up, slipped the card back into my pocket, and started the engine. The bank's address burned quietly in my memory as I pulled onto the road. Not with hope exactly, but with the kind of resolve that comes when you've already lost everything that could be taken from you. Cumberland National Trust rose out of the morning fog like it didn't belong to the same city as the diner or the cracked sidewalks I'd driven over to get there. Marble columns framed the entrance, their surfaces worn smooth by decades of hands that never worried about the cold. The brass doors reflected a version of me I barely recognized. Unshaven eyes, rimmed red shoulders, tight with a night spent folded in on myself. I hesitated before going in. Not because I doubted the card, because I doubted myself. Inside, the air was warmer than I expected, scented faintly with polished wood and winter coats drying. The lobby was quiet. Too quiet. A woman in her 50s sat behind the reception desk posture, straight glasses perched low on her nose as she reviewed something on a tablet. She looked up when I approached and offered a practiced smile. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" The words stuck in my throat. I hadn't rehearsed this. I hadn't even imagined how it would sound to ask. "I need to check the balance on an old account," I said finally. "I have the card." I slid it across the counter. Her smile didn't disappear, but it changed. Not alarmed, not impressed, recognizing. She turned the card over once, then again slower this time, as if verifying something she already knew. When she looked back at me, her eyes held a new weight. "I'll need to contact a manager," she said quietly. "A manager? For a balance check." I nodded and moved to one of the leather chairs near the window. They were softer than anything I'd sat on in months. My hands folded in my lap without instruction, fingers worrying the same spot on my sleeve. A young couple passed by with a stroller. A man with silver hair reviewed documents at a side table, his pen moving in calm, deliberate strokes. Everyone looked exactly where they belonged. I didn't. Minutes stretched. 5, 10. My mind filled the silence with familiar conclusions. The account was closed. The card was symbolic. I'd misunderstood my grandmother built a last hope on a childhood memory and desperation. Any second now, someone would politely explain that to me, and I would leave with nothing but a new layer of embarrassment. The office door opened. A man stepped into the lobby, tall, early 40s charcoal suit, tailored without being loud about it. His hair was neat, his expression controlled in a way that suggested experience rather than coldness. He scanned the room once before his eyes found me. "Mr. Cole?" he asked. I stood too quickly. "Yes." "I'm Daniel Brooks," he said, offering a hand. "Branch manager. Would you come with me, please?" The word "please" landed gently, but the request carried weight. He led me down a hallway lined with framed photographs. Stern faces from another century, names etched in small plaques beneath them. The door to his office closed behind us with a soft click that sounded far too final. He gestured to a chair. I sat. He remained standing for a moment, studying the card in his hand, before placing it carefully on the desk between us. "Before we proceed," he said, settling into his seat, "I'll need to verify your identity." I handed over my license. He examined it, typed something into his computer, and paused. Just long enough for my pulse to climb into my throat. "Mr. Cole," he said at last, turning the monitor slightly away from me, "the account associated with this card is what we classify as a legacy matriarch account." I didn't know what that meant, but the way he said it made my stomach tighten. "It hasn't been accessed in many years," he continued. "By design." "Is it closed?" I asked. He looked at me, then really looked. "No," he said. "It's active, fully protected, and accessible only under very specific conditions." My mouth felt dry. "Which are?" He slid the card back toward me, stopping it with 2 fingers. "Presentation of the physical card by the designated beneficiary." The room felt smaller, brighter, too real. "And that beneficiary," he said, his voice lowering just a fraction, "is you." For a moment, I couldn't process the words. Beneficiary implied intention, planning, choice. All things my parents had insisted never applied to me. Daniel turned back to his screen and began navigating through files with a practiced calm that felt almost unreal. Rows of documents filled the monitor: account records, legal notes, internal memos. This wasn't a savings account forgotten at the back of a drawer. It was layered, deliberate, built to last. "This account was established when you were 9, he said, as if discussing the weather. "By Margaret Cole." My chest tightened. Hearing my grandmother's name spoken here in this place felt like watching 2 parts of my life collide. They told me she didn't have anything I said quietly. They said she lived off her pension. Daniel's expression didn't change. But something in his posture shifted, as if he'd heard variations of this before. "Your grandmother was financially independent until the day she passed," he said. "And she was fully competent." He clicked into another folder and rotated the screen just enough for me to see headings and dates. Medical evaluations, physician signatures, notes from specialists, each one confirming the same thing. No cognitive decline, no impairment, no confusion. My parents' voices echoed in my head. "She doesn't recognize people anymore. She's not stable. You shouldn't upset her. All lies." They tried. Daniel continued on multiple occasions to gain financial guardianship over her estate. The word hit hard. Tried. They told me they were protecting her. "Yes," he said evenly, "they often do." I felt something cold settle in my stomach as pieces I'd never questioned before began to rearrange themselves. The restrictions, the sudden rules about visits, the way conversation stopped when I entered rooms. They hadn't been worried about her health. They'd been waiting for access. Daniel opened another document. An internal note dated years back flagged for executive review. "Your grandmother anticipated potential interference," he said. "She structured the account to activate only under conditions of personal displacement." I swallowed. Displacement, loss of housing, financial abandonment, estrangement initiated by immediate family. The room went quiet. Not because Daniel stopped speaking, but because my mind did. My grandmother hadn't just prepared for a possibility. She had predicted this exact outcome. He reached into a drawer and placed a thin red folder on the desk. It looked old-fashioned, the kind of thing people used before everything lived on screens. My name was written across the front in careful handwriting I recognized instantly. For Adrian, Daniel read softly, "When you are finally free." My hands shook as I touched it. The weight wasn't physical. It was emotional, pressing down on something in my chest that had been held tight for years. I opened it slowly, afraid that whatever was inside might break if I rushed. The first page was a letter. My grandmother's handwriting filled it, looping and precise despite the tremor I remembered from her later years. "My dear boy, if you're reading this, it means they've done what I feared they would. Please know this before anything else. Nothing they said about you was ever true. You were never weak. You were never a burden. You were inconvenient to people who needed control." I stopped breathing without realizing it. Daniel cleared his throat gently. "There's more," he said. "But before I continue, I need to ask you something." I looked up, my vision blurred. "What? Why did you come in today?" he asked, not accusing, not curious, just direct. I thought of the snow, the locked door, the trash bag. My parents kicked me out, I said. I slept in my car. I didn't have anywhere else to go. He nodded once. That aligns with her instructions. He turned the screen toward me fully now. I'm going to show you the balance, he said. But I want you to understand, this isn't about money. The numbers appeared before I could prepare myself. And whatever I'd expected, it wasn't this. The numbers didn't make sense at first. My brain tried to reject them the way it rejects unfamiliar pain. I blinked, leaned closer, then back again, convinced the screen would change if I looked at it from a different angle. It didn't. $41.6 million, liquid. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. The room felt suddenly airless, as if the walls had shifted inward without warning. I'd spent the last night calculating how many days I could stretch a tank of gas and a loaf of bread. Now, I was staring at a figure that could erase every fear I'd ever been taught to live with. Daniel watched me carefully. He didn't rush. He didn't congratulate me. He let the moment settle heavy and disorienting because he knew this wasn't relief. It was shock. There are additional assets, he said when my breathing finally evened out. Commercial properties, land holdings, equity positions. This, he gestured to the number, is only the immediately accessible portion. Only. I laughed then. Not because anything was funny, but because my body needed to release something before it collapsed under the weight of it all. They told me she had nothing, I said, my voice breaking. They said she couldn't help me even if she wanted to. They weren't given access, Daniel replied. Ever. Your grandmother's instructions were explicit. He opened another file and a list of holdings scrolled down the screen. Addresses I didn't recognize, corporate names I'd seen in headlines, but never imagined connected to my life. Everything my parents had dismissed as impossible had been real all along, just hidden from the people who would have destroyed it. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to slow my heart. Why me, I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. Why would she leave all of this to me? Daniel reached for the red folder and opened it to a page I hadn't seen yet. Another letter, this one shorter. Because you were the only one who never asked me for anything. The words hit harder than the number ever could. She documented everything Daniel said quietly. Medical evaluations, legal counsel, recorded statements. She anticipated a challenge and built safeguards accordingly. As if summoned by his words, another file opened on the screen. A video thumbnail appeared, my grandmother sitting in her living room, hands folded in her lap. The timestamp showed it had been recorded months before she died. Daniel didn't play it yet. There's one more thing you should know before you see this, he said. Your parents made multiple attempts to redirect these assets to themselves. When that failed, they began laying groundwork to discredit you. My stomach twisted. How character narratives, he said. Claims of instability, financial irresponsibility, emotional dependency. The same things they'd told me my entire life. Daniel slid a document across the desk. A legal directive. In my grandmother's handwriting, a single sentence was underlined. If they turn on him, protect him from them. I closed my eyes. For years I'd believed my parents when they said I was too sensitive, too weak, that I imagined cruelty where none existed. But here was proof that someone else had seen it too. Someone had believed me long before I learned to believe myself. Daniel finally clicked play. My grandmother's voice filled the office, thin but steady. She spoke my name and smiled in that sad, knowing way I remembered. They will try to take from you, she said. Not because you owe them, but because they cannot stand to see you free. I felt tears spill over before I could stop them. The woman they'd dismissed as confused had known exactly what she was doing. She hadn't just left me money. She'd left me the truth. And as the video ended and the office fell silent again, I understood something that would change everything that came next. My parents hadn't thrown me out because I was worthless. They'd done it because they were afraid. The fear didn't disappear when I left the bank. It followed me quiet and watchful like a shadow that knew my shape too well. I walked back to my car with the red folder pressed tight against my chest, the cold barely registering as snowflakes melted into the fabric of my sleeves. $41 million. Property, protection. None of it made me feel powerful. It made me feel exposed. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there with my forehead resting against the steering wheel, breathing through the aftershocks. My entire life had been built around scarcity, measured meals, conditional affection, the constant awareness of how easily everything could be taken away. Now I had proof that narrative was a lie, and I had no idea how to live without it. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. You need to come home. We need to talk. I stared at the screen, my pulse thudding in my ears. They'd found me faster than I expected. I blocked the number without replying, then another message appeared from a different unknown contact. You're confused. You don't understand what you're doing. Confused. The same word they'd used for my grandmother. By the time I pulled out of the parking lot, my hands were shaking again. I drove aimlessly, avoiding familiar routes, watching my mirrors more than the road. Every dark sedan made my stomach clench. Every red light felt like an invitation to be trapped. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until my vision narrowed and the world tilted. The tightness in my chest sharpened breath, turning shallow and uneven. I managed to pull over before the dizziness overtook me. The car rolling to a stop beside a pharmacy I didn't recognize. Then, everything went black. I woke to bright lights and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room. A monitor beeped steadily beside me, each sound a reminder that I was still here. A man in scrubs stood near the foot of the bed, his expression focused but not alarmed. "I'm Dr. Samuel Wright," he said. "You fainted in the parking lot. Dehydration, lack of sleep, acute stress." "When was the last time you ate?" I tried to answer and realized my throat hurt. "Yesterday morning," I said, finally. His jaw tightened slightly. He didn't scold me. He didn't minimize it. He made notes on the chart, his pen moving with purpose. "You've been under prolonged emotional strain," he said. "That matters. It's not weakness." The words landed unexpectedly hard. While I lay there, an IV warming my arm, my phone buzzed again. Unknown numbers. Voicemails piling up. I turned the screen face down and closed my eyes, my grandmother's voice echoing faintly in my memory. "They will try to take from you." When I was discharged, Dr. Wright handed me a copy of my report. "If anyone questions your condition," he said quietly, "this documents exactly what happened. No speculation. Just facts." It took me a second to understand what he was offering me. A record. A shield. I drove to a small cafe across from the hospital, needing somewhere public and bright. I ordered food I barely tasted and kept the folder on the table where I could see it anchoring myself to its weight. That's when I noticed the car. Gray, parked across the street, engine idling. It didn't move when I did. It didn't pull away when I left. By the time I reached the far end of the block, it was still there waiting. I ducked into another store, heart pounding, and watched through the glass as the car remained patient and unbothered. This wasn't coincidence. It was surveillance. I didn't go home that night. I drove until the city blurred into something unfamiliar and checked into the cheapest hotel that didn't ask questions. I slept with the chair jammed under the door handle, the red folder beside the bed like a silent witness. And somewhere between the sirens outside and the hum of the heater, I understood the final truth my grandmother had prepared me for. Money doesn't end control. It exposes how far some people will go to regain it. I woke before dawn, not because I was rested, but because my body had learned that sleep was dangerous. The hotel room was still dark, the heater rattling in uneven bursts. The chair I'd wedged under the door exactly where I'd left it. For a few seconds I lay there listening, waiting for the sound of someone trying the handle. Nothing happened. That almost made it worse. My phone lit up the moment I turned it on. Missed calls, voicemails, emails from addresses I didn't recognize. You've made a serious mistake. You're being manipulated. That money belongs to the family. My hands felt slick as I scrolled. None of the messages asked if I was safe. None mentioned the night I'd spent in my car or the hospital visit. Every word was a demand, a correction, an attempt to pull me back into the shape they preferred. Then one subject line froze me in place. Emergency petition filed. I opened it with shaking fingers. The language was clinical, detached, and terrifying in its precision. My parents were requesting an immediate review of my mental fitness to manage assets. They cited erratic behavior, emotional instability, and concerns for his well-being. Reading it felt like watching someone rewrite my life with words I'd been trained to accept as truth. I sat on the edge of the bed and laughed softly, the sound brittle. They weren't improvising. This was strategy. Years of conditioning turned into paperwork. By mid-morning, I was back at the bank, ushered through a side entrance into a small conference room I hadn't seen before. Daniel Brooks was already there, his expression tight but controlled. Spread across the table were documents, printouts, folders, evidence stacked like armor. They moved faster than we hoped, he said, but not faster than she prepared. He slid a packet toward me. Inside were copies of emails my parents had sent years earlier, attempting to convince the bank my grandmother was incompetent. Another section contained recorded meeting summaries where they'd argued she was being manipulated by me. Each claim was countered by medical evaluations, legal opinions, timestamps. My grandmother had anticipated every angle. They're also alleging you coerced her, Daniel continued. Which is why this matters. He played another video. This one was shorter, recorded on a phone. My grandmother sat at her kitchen table looking directly into the camera. No one is pressuring me, she said clearly. These decisions are mine. Anyone who says otherwise is lying. The calm certainty in her voice made my throat tighten. There's more, Daniel said. We discovered something during a routine review. He pulled out a document flagged in red. A forged signature. My grandmother's name traced clumsily over an original form. The attempt had failed, but the evidence remained. Your father submitted this 8 years ago, Daniel said. It's enough to raise serious questions about intent. The room felt colder. Not because of fear, but because of clarity. They hadn't just waited. They'd tried, over and over. As I left the bank, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. We know where you're staying. I stopped walking. Across the street, the gray sedan sat at the curb, engine running. The driver didn't look at me. He didn't have to. The message had already done its work. I drove straight back to the hospital and found Dr. Wright in the ER. I showed him the messages, my hands steady now in a way they hadn't been before. This is harassment, he said flatly. And if they're claiming you're unstable, he gestured to my discharge report, says otherwise. He added an addendum to my file documenting the threats, the stress response, the ongoing pursuit. You're doing everything right, he said. Don't let them convince you otherwise. That afternoon, as I moved between public spaces, staying visible, staying grounded, another notification came through. The court had scheduled an emergency hearing. My parents wanted control back. What they were about to get was exposure. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, a sterile attempt to make conflict feel orderly. I sat at the narrow table beside Daniel Brooks, my hands folded, my posture careful. Across the aisle, my parents sat close together, their faces composed in the way people practice when they believe the room will belong to them. My mother dabbed at her eyes before anyone had spoken. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight, already preparing to look wounded. The judge entered without ceremony. No drama, no patience for theatrics. The petition was read aloud in a voice stripped of emotion. Claims of instability, impulsivity, vulnerability to manipulation. Each phrase sounded disturbingly familiar, like a script I'd been hearing since childhood. I kept my eyes on the tabletop, breathing slowly, reminding myself that silence was not agreement. My parents' attorney spoke first. Her tone was warm, concerned, almost parental. She painted a picture of a son who had spiraled after sudden access to money he couldn't understand, a son who had isolated himself, a son who needed guidance. Guidance. That word nearly made me smile. When it was Daniel's turn, the room shifted. He didn't argue. He documented. Medical records were submitted. The judge reviewed Dr. Wright's assessment, eyes narrowing slightly as he read. No signs of delusion. No impaired judgment. Acute stress consistent with recent trauma. Fully oriented, fully competent. Daniel then introduced the videos. My grandmother's recorded statements played through the courtroom speakers, her voice calm and unshakable. She spoke of her intentions, her concerns, her explicit desire that I be protected from interference. My mother's composure cracked for the first time. Next came the emails. My parents' words projected onto a screen for everyone to see. Discussions about access, about leverage, about making me appear unreliable. The room went very quiet. The forged document was last. The judge leaned forward, studying it in silence that stretched long enough to feel deliberate. When he looked up, his gaze fixed on my father. "Did you submit this document?" he asked. My father hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. It was enough. "No," he said. The judge's expression didn't change, because our records indicate otherwise. He turned back to Daniel. "Petition denied," he said simply. "And I am issuing an immediate restraining order against both petitioners." My mother gasped. My father surged forward, voice raised, but the bailiff was already moving. The gavel came down once sharp and final. "This court will not be used to facilitate financial coercion," the judge continued. "Nor will it entertain unfounded claims intended to undermine a competent adult. Further investigation is warranted." I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with low conversation shoes echoing against tile. I leaned against the wall, the tension draining from my body in a slow, shaky wave. Daniel stood beside me, giving me space. "You did well," he said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak. My parents exited moments later. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My father did. His stare held fury, disbelief, something close to panic. For the first time, he looked small. They didn't speak to me. They didn't need to. The order posted on the door said everything. As I walked down the courthouse steps, winter air biting at my face, my phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. Blocked. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. For years, I'd believed standing up to them would destroy me. That without their approval, I would collapse into nothing. Instead, the opposite had happened. They had tried to take everything from me, and in doing so, they had finally given me back my life. The silence afterward felt unfamiliar. Not empty, just unoccupied. For days, my phone stayed quiet. No new numbers, no messages disguised as concern, no reminders of who I was supposed to be for someone else. The restraining order worked the way boundaries always do. When they're finally enforced, it created space. And in that space, I had to decide what to do with myself. I didn't rush into anything. I stayed in public places. I walked. I slept. I ate meals without counting the cost first. Simple things that felt almost ceremonial after years of measuring my worth in restraint. The money remained untouched, sitting where my grandmother had placed it, not as a temptation, but as a reassurance. I didn't need to prove anything by using it. A week later, I drove out of the city to a small town an hour north. Quiet streets, modest houses, the kind of place my parents would have dismissed as beneath them. I rented a small place with a porch and a view of trees instead of traffic. It wasn't a statement. It was a choice. I visited my grandmother's grave on a gray morning that smelled like wet earth. I brought no grand speech with me, just flowers she used to keep on her windowsill and a truth I'd finally learned how to say out loud. You were right, I told her, about all of it. Standing there, I understood something that had taken me years to articulate. Love doesn't make you smaller so it can feel larger by comparison. It doesn't isolate you, frighten you, or demand silence. What my parents offered had never been love. It had been ownership. And ownership panics when it loses control. In the weeks that followed, the investigation continued without my involvement. I was informed, not summoned. Updates came in neat emails stripped of drama. My parents' names appeared less and less in my thoughts. Not because I forgave them, but because they no longer occupied space rent-free in my mind. I began planning not extravagantly, not recklessly, but deliberately. Education I'd postponed. Work that interested me, not work that impressed others. I funded programs my grandmother had quietly supported for years, the ones she never spoke about, because generosity was never something she performed. The strangest part was how ordinary everything felt once fear loosened its grip. Mornings became predictable. Nights became quiet. The world didn't end when I stopped explaining myself. Sometimes I caught myself waiting for the other shoe to drop. For punishment, for loss. But it didn't come. What came instead was a steady realization I had survived the worst version of my life, and nothing that followed could unmake that fact. I kept the black card in a drawer not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Not of money, but of timing, of patience, of someone who saw the storm coming and built a shelter instead of demanding gratitude for the rain. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. Being cast out doesn't mean you failed. Sometimes it means you've outgrown a place that needed you small. And walking away isn't weakness. It's the first honest decision you've ever made. I didn't win by becoming richer than my parents. I won by becoming free. There's a strange kind of silence that comes after everything collapses. Not the quiet you feel when a room empties, but the kind that settles inside you, once the noise you grew up with finally stops. For a long time, I thought that silence meant I had lost, that being cut off, cast out, or erased was proof that something in me had failed. What I understand now is that silence can also mean space. Space to hear your own thoughts without them being corrected. Space to feel hunger, fear, grief, or relief without someone telling you those feelings are wrong or inconvenient. Space to notice how much of your life was spent shrinking not because you were weak, but because staying small was the only way to stay safe. I used to believe that love was something you earned by enduring, by proving you were useful, by absorbing blame until it felt normal. That belief followed me everywhere, shaping my choices long after I stopped calling it fear. It made me doubt my instincts. It made me question my worth the moment someone raised their voice. Losing my family didn't fix me. It didn't magically make the pain disappear. What it did was remove the constant pressure to perform for people who were never going to be satisfied. And in that absence, I learned something quieter, harder, and far more valuable. You don't have to be chosen by the people who hurt you in order to choose yourself. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do isn't fighting back or proving them wrong. It's stepping into a life where you no longer need their permission to exist.